Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Bible study this week on Isaiah 35, 1 through 10. In this video, we will be primarily using the intelligences of verbal, linguistic, and intrapersonal. If you feel led in a different direction in terms of a photo or a drawing or a song, please feel free to use those as well. However, I am focusing primarily on the verbal linguistic and the intrapersonal. And by that I mean the invitation is for for all of us, to think about in these verses God's story and then how we fit into God's story, how you fit into God's story, and what connections you might make with this passage in God's story. So I invite you to set aside your writing utensils, your laptops, or the extra applications that you might have open at this time, or thinking about your grocery list or what have you, or all of the other millions of things that you also have to do today and yet this week. So I'm inviting you to be as wholly present with this text as God is already wholly present with you and wholly present with us. So I'm going to read these verses, and I'm just inviting you to be open. Let the Spirit speak to you. Let the Spirit open your ears. Let the Spirit open your eyes and open your heart to what is here in these verses this morning. So, Isaiah 35, 1 through 10. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands, and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp, the grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come up on it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So now I invite you to think about words or phrases that you heard, very much like a practice of Lectio Divina. But think of words and phrases that stood out to you. In my own reading, words that stand out to me: rejoice, joy. The words of how the land, the burning sand, shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. That stands out to me. The highway being called a holy way. And then the thought that the redeemed shall walk there. And then at the end, the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. And then again it goes into joy, and then finally sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So for me, I think this whole pericope is just full of rich imagery, and you could go a lot of different places. But the context here, the story here, the story of God, is that this is a people who are definitely in need of refreshment, definitely in need of God's action, of God's presence, somehow to break forth into their lives. And so I don't want to spend too much time on that, because I want to spend more time on that in the other video when we talk about the exegetical study piece of this text. But to think about this in terms of God's story and how we fit into God's story. And for me, I'm thinking about a lot of different things. Connections to life. I'm going through a divorce. I have aging parents that are both dealing with cancer. I'm serving in a church that's going through a tough time right now. And then not the least of which is this kind of umbrella, as I like to call it, experience of the pandemic that's kind of hanging over us all. And so to hear that God is, that in this story of God, there is a time of renewal coming. There is a time of redemption and reconciliation, a time of return, a time of, but also not just that there's something coming, but to me also that God is still present with me in these moments, in this time of difficulty. And so the things in which I find great comfort and strength, things by that I mean verses. The eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, the tongue of the speechless sing for joy, for waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The very thing that seems so absolutely impossible, practically speaking, in terms of the blind whose eyes will be opened and the deaf whose ears will be unstopped, the lame leaping like deer and the speechless sing for joy. That resonates with me as one of my sons, my older one, has significant disabilities. And to think practically about there being a day when he will be able to leap like a deer. He has difficulty walking, and his speech will be that of singing for joy. At this point, his speech is limited, 3, 4, 5 word sentences. And to think of times in life when there is such a struggle, as I feel it very much in my own life right now, to think of waters that break forth. There's something about water. I was actually thinking about taking this recording outside. However, it's so very windy, I thought that that would be more of a distraction than a help. But for a few years, I lived in Ocean Shores, Washington, not that long ago, from 2016 to 2018. And literally, we lived on the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. I could hear the ocean from our front porch. I walked to the ocean every day from the church with my dog. And so that experience of being near the water, and so thinking about water breaking forth in the wilderness is such a wonderful, I find that a wonderful comfort. I find strength in that. And to think about streams in the desert, again, something that seems so impossible. And it feels like, again, for me personally, that I'm in this kind of desert. In lots of different ways that I've already mentioned, but also my younger son has been diagnosed with COVID last week, and so is home and not working and dealing with that. And of course, I'm a mom, and so I guess I shouldn't say of course, but I do. Even as a person of faith, I struggle with that. I struggle with the care and concern that I have for him, and I confess the worry. And yet there is hope here. And it's not a hope that in the story of God, it wasn't a hope that the people could bring forth on their own, but it was a hope that God brings forth. And I think that that's a wonderful reminder. I know it is for me, especially in this time, and thinking about the hope that God can bring out of all of these different things that I'm experiencing, but also perhaps what you're experiencing. Maybe you're experiencing something else that is challenging you, or you're finding it difficult to see the streams in the desert, or you're finding it tough to think about a holy way that will be just laid out for you, and there will be no more trial and no more trouble, and the path will be clear. And maybe that's where you are. So the invitation from this first video is to think of a way to describe that. Journal about it. Maybe use Lectio Divina as a way that you read through the text again and you pull out those words that resonate with you, and then you use that as a way to discern perhaps an action step, perhaps a step of faith in some way, stepping out into the unknown because of the reading of this text. And think about it too in terms of how your story fits within the larger story of God in some way. So journaling, Lectio Divina, as I've already mentioned, but also if you're more leaning toward a drawing, or if you're leaning more toward a photo or something along those lines, feel free to